All right, I think we are live, and this is the Live with Sondra show. And for today's episode, I have a very special guest today, one that I'm excited to talk about because it's a topic that we haven't touched much on over the last year or really ever on this show, which is people. And one of the reasons I'm excited about this, and I'm just going to start with a little bit of my thoughts on people strategies, is as I've developed as a leader in my company over the years, one of the things that I've learned about business is that people are what drive businesses forward. People are what businesses are made of, and that business is always about people. So, let's talk about today's guest and let's talk about this session where we are going to be discussing leading with purpose, DEI, and innovation in the attractions industry. And I have a very special guest today, Colin North Cheadle. He is an experienced HR leader and an executive coach for over 20 years of experience with over 20 years of experience in Fortune 500 companies, startups, and government agencies. He specialized in diversity centered organizational change, talent acquisition, and technology development. There's that word, technology. You guys know I love that word. Colin has led strategic improvements in workplace experiences, guided corporate leadership through acquisition, and is known for his expertise in people operation strategies and change management. His passion for people drives his success in enhancing organizational performance. And as I said just a moment ago, business is about people. And I'm very excited to introduce this person to you today. Colin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Sondra. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So I know we talked a little bit about your experience in that intro that I think you could hear me.
Well
I
done.
always wonder
Well
if the
done.
guests can hear me on the other side. But
Well done. Well done.
oh, thank you. Is there anything else that you want to add to that before we, jump into this big topic?
No, well, I mean, listen, people make the world go round, and it is and always has been, as you so aptly stated, about people. Other than that, really, I think I just want to reiterate the very thing that you said, and I think it's very true.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I'm 100% sincere when I say that as I've grown as a professional, both in my role and as somebody who's building a company and trying to move things forward, one of my mentors said to me at one point that the problems of the people become the problems of the business. And this is why I'm so excited about this conversation that we're going to have today, because we're touching on a topic that, many of us don't know much about, right? HR sometimes is a mystery to everyone. And I'm hoping you're going to crack that mystery for us today. And I'd like to start with maybe a couple questions about HR leadership and organizational development.
Yeah.
And first, what I'm curious about is, what role does HR play in strategic partnerships in today's rapidly evolving industries? And seeing that most of the audience listening today is from our attractions industry, if there's any application there.
Yeah. I'm just newly in the attraction industry, so disclaimer, right? I'm newly into this industry, but one thing that I have found to be true, no matter what industry that I've been in, and no matter what company that I work for, is that the ability of an HR leader to gain the trust of leadership, to become a trusted advisor, that trusted confidant that leadership feels like no matter what's happening, they got to have at the table with them to help them make decisions. That's what makes HR successful. And I know you said HR can be mysterious, and I don't think it ever should be, right? Because at the end of the day, we're
Yeah.
talking about people. We're talking about people and how people operate and how people move and the things that they need and how they grow with the organization, with the company, and really how a company can retain that talent, those people. What I think a good HR leader does is they demystify HR, right? At the end of the day, it's really about understanding people. It's about learning about people. It's about learning what hurts, right? What doesn't hurt? What's upsetting? what's causing us problems, what are our obstacles, and then helping them come alongside them to help them work through those issues and challenges. I think that HR has gotten a bad rap because all too often we hear of HR, we watch The Office, and we see this inept, transactional, paper pushing, bureaucratic, rule following HR function that really doesn't do anything to help the business transform. All it really does is take care of the business's trash, right? So um, transformational HR is the type of HR that enables organizations to grow beyond where they are, right? And so my
Yeah.
work and my goal and my challenge and my belief is that a strong HR team is the type of HR team that can number one be trusted by the business leaders, that possesses an ability to understand the business, so that it can then challenge the business to be better.
You said something there that really piqued my interest, which is the transformational HR.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm curious if you wouldn't mind diving a little deeper into that, because I like the sound of that, because I think in most businesses, there comes a time where you've got to make this decision for both the business and the people, right?
That's
So,
right.
maybe would you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think of transformational HR as opposed to transactional HR, I'm thinking of the
Mm.
HR function being one that operates again as a strategic partner with the business. So you can't do that unless you understand the business first, right? So, but once you understand the business, then you can begin to hypothesize about ways to make the business better. Well, how do we take this part of the operation and move it to the other side of the business to help that business, and vice versa? How do we take what might be more of a traditional functional hierarchy and spread it out, right? And make it more longitudinal, and help multiple areas of the business operate at the same time. But you can't really get inside of that room where those decisions are being made if you don't have credibility. And you won't have credibility if you don't know the business. But once you can say, yes, I've done my research, I understand the business, and I see these gaps in how the business is operating that I think we can help if we do this, if we do A, B, and C. Well, while you've been doing D, E, and F, those don't seem to be the things that have been the most effective. Let us show you how to do A, B, and C, and let's pilot this and see how that works.
Yeah.
That's how this transforms and gets better.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned transformational versus transactional, because so many times these interactions that we have in business do feel and seem very transactional, which, might not rub everybody the right way. Let's be real. You know what I mean? We are people, and we're real people, and we want to be dealt with in ways that we can all be aligned with the goals of the business, or maybe any of the initiatives that the business has, which kind of brings me to a couple of questions that just came to mind as you're talking about transformation. I mean, in terms of like the HR's role in bringing about the mission and maybe even the vision and the values of the company. I mean, where does that come into play? Because I know also, like, when we talk about leadership, it is their job to inspire, right? And to get people on mission and moving towards the same targets. Where
Mhm.
do you see HR working? What part of HR does that fall in there? Where do they see themselves in that? What role do they see themselves in
Yeah.
those kind of missions?
Yeah, that's good. I think HR's role is to um, champion the work of the organization, and business leaders should be able to partner with their strategic HR leaders to help identify who the early adopters are, get those folks on board and helping you to share the mission and the vision of the organization. I read a book, and the name of it escapes me. It might come back to me while we're talking, but I'm getting old and senile, so I don't remember. But what I do remember about this book that I read spoke to this notion of the mission and vision of the leader becoming the mission and vision of the people, so that they start to embody that mission and vision and see themselves in that work. So in essence, it's not really any longer the leaders mission and vision. It's their mission and it's their vision. And so I think aside from being a strategic partner, the other challenge and the other benefit that really strong strategic HR partners bring is that they help the people in the organization see how they connect to the work and
Yeah.
their functions and where they sit, right?
Yeah, and purpose. I heard somebody say one time I was listening to a speaker, and he is my friend on LinkedIn. So if he's listening, pop in here because I followed him, and I don't want to steal this of his, but I thought it was so brilliant because he said a lot of times our teams are burned out because they don't have a big enough purpose. They're not connected with the vision of the company. They're not on mission. Or in my early days as a leader, because, I mentioned a little bit of my story, I kind of came up. When I started with this company, I was the youngest and the only woman and and the only minority. So, it was a real challenge because this was a San Francisco company. We were making some big changes and a big change started with me being totally disruptive as the youngest and only woman in the company. And navigating that over the years was super interesting, but I had to learn some things the hard way, right? By making mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes were with people, and that's what kind of led me to some of the ideas that I have today in terms of leadership, and that is ensuring that everyone on my team is successful, and not success by how I measure success or a mission, but successful in their own right. What does that look like for them? Are they achieving their own professional and personal, and even their own financial goals,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I'm curious, is that something that you see HR being able to help with regards to transformation?
Yeah, I think HR should, right, be able to help that because again, if HR understands the business, then they should be able to understand every life cycle that the business goes through. What you talked about also, and when I'm thinking of success versus failure, uh, I'm thinking of my mother's philosophy. My late mother, God bless her soul, Betty Cheadle, said she was an educator, a lifelong educator, and her philosophy was that if any one of her students failed, she failed.
Uh,
And so I don't know that I think there's still those types of leaders that are out there. But I think that when you have leaders that have that system of belief, the same type of belief, Sondra, that you said, leaders who can figure out ways to unlock the talents and the abilities and the aspirations of those on their teams, those who report to them, and help them to be the best versions of themselves every day that they come to work. That's if that can be scaled throughout the organization, then how much more powerful will the organization be when there are people in the organization who have this sense of courage, not being
yeah,
afraid of failure, not being afraid to make mistakes, but being released to create and not make mistakes, but not hopefully not continue to make the same mistakes, but be okay, be given permission to break things, be given permission to make mistakes so
yeah.
that they can grow and so that the company can grow and get better.
Yeah, and I think what I love about that too is that it goes back to that purpose, right? Too, for
That's
the
right.
people. And most of whom I hope they have their own purpose that is bigger than this problem or this solution that we're trying to solve in business. And that kind of leads me to maybe asking if you wouldn't mind sharing an example of how you've used HR leadership to drive meaningful results in businesses.
Yeah. I think we talked a little bit about this before, but I always kind of harken back to my understanding of organizational development. I'm a psychology person by trade. That's what my degree is in, but I'm also well versed in organizational management and just people dynamics. And so I think that HR can have an impact when they listen and when
Yeah,
they take an opportunity to learn about the leaders of the organization, those who have been saddled with the responsibility to innovate and to bring ideas to them that help them to do that. like perhaps if you're working with a team, it's a very homogenous team. Everybody looks the same, thinks the same, talks the same, acts the same. So that thought leadership on the team is always going to look the same. But when you start to mix up the diversity makeup and the complexion of that team, and you bring in, people with different experiences, bring in people from different ethnic backgrounds, bring in people from different economic backgrounds. Now the voices and the conversations that are taking place in the room around the things that need to be innovated take new shape. They take new form, and when you bring new diverse perspectives to the table, this is the type of thing that can create the spark that organizations need to be able to actually change.
Yeah.
You can't
Well,
change when
I'm
everybody's doing everything the same way.
100%. And, that actually kind of leads me to, DEI initiatives in the attractions industry. And, why do you believe DEI is so critical to the success of any business or an attraction that might be listening today? And, would you mind sharing maybe some best practices that, or actionable steps that maybe someone listening can take that might help them better their organization, maybe move them
Mm-hmm.
closer to their targets,
Mm-hmm.
understanding these things?
Sure. You said a lot.
I know,
Correct me
I'm
if I
always
if
full of
I
loaded
if I'm not
questions. I'm so
tracking.
sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Like if I'm not tracking, just say, Colin, say it again. But uh, I can start with kind of what I think in terms of my processes and my approach. I
Sure.
think there's a couple things that are super important in this work. One of them is to really allow the data. If you can get your hands on the data for what the business has done historically, what they do currently, what they're planning for the future. Get the data that supports that, because I've seen in my time that some businesses say, diversity is a priority, but then when I begin to look at the data and I look at their hiring trends and I look at their retention for BIPOC and different ethnic groups and different intersections, and when I look at the trends for promotions and the trends for a corrective action, those don't necessarily line up with what I'm being told by what the leadership has to say. So um, I think the first thing is to look at the data. And I think the second thing is to look at the structures and the systems that are in place that either support or fight the experiences of people from ethnically diverse groups, people who identify across all of the variety of the spectrum of diversity, all the different layers of diversity. And so when the structures that are in place don't create spaces and avenues for these groups of individuals to have a voice, to have impact, to contribute, then right, like how can you expect them to want to stay? How can you expect them to want to be there? A lot of times we hear about and we talk about. I think it's the catchphrase. It's pretty popular now about getting in the room, right? Being in the room. Well, but it's not enough to be in the room. Like if you
Yeah.
get in the room and you're not heard, what good is it being in the room? If you get in the room and you might have a voice, but there's a certain voice that's always dominating the conversation, and your voice is never heard because you can't get in, you can't compete with the voice that's always being heard, that oftentimes is not a voice that represents the ethnic diversity and the ethnic group and the diversity makeup, then how do you expect to have an impact? And so it's not just about being in the room, it's about being in the room and getting heard in the room, and then having the things that you say with your voice in the room be acted upon, right? And so how do you operationalize? I think that's one of the tricks, is operationalizing the the things that come out of these conversations, where you get to hear about the perspectives and the experiences of of those folks in your organization who do not represent the majority of the organization.
Yeah.
That's how you start to put DE&I practices to work. It's about putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the data because I think that is like a sure way to understand what's happening in a business. We can't measure what, we can't manage what we can't measure. Right. And so the thoughtfulness behind that, I think, is really an actionable thing that anyone listening today can look at and do today. Are you looking at the data? And it's interesting because I love that you brought up having a seat at the table. I have a saying in my from my own experience. You know, like I mentioned, I was the youngest and the only woman in the company when I started, but there was this voice in my head that was always like, "But you can't be the last." So, you know, from where I sit today, I also recognize that one, it is the data, but also, you know, I now have this huge responsibility to create opportunity for others who are like me or not like me, right? Like it doesn't even have to be that way, but you can't be the last one to sit down at that table if you find yourself there. And just me as a woman, that's how I feel. I don't want to be the last woman here. You know, in technology, women make up, I think, 5% of executives still. It's very, very low. I mean, we make up 26% of technology. And mind you, I mean, women don't tend to be engineers. So, I mean, you got to look at the data, like you said, you know. But when we are great at it. And so I love that advice that you gave today. You know, and my next question for you is, you know, how can organizations in the attraction industry ensure that they are not only diverse but also truly equitable and inclusive in their daily operations?
Yeah. Um, but yeah, again, I think of operationalizing DE&I and how do you do that, right? I think about every organization, not just the attractions industry, but every organization should be looking at the landscape of the future and saying, what does the future look like, right? The company that
Yeah,
I'm with now, you know, the tagline of the company that I'm with now is um, um, the way of the future is inclusivity. It's the future of the sport.
yeah,
It's the future of the organization. It's the future of everything. And so, you know, how do you make something that seems, you know, mysterious very practical? And I think
yeah,
again, you have to go to the audiences and you have to go to the communities and you have to go to the places where diversity exists to better understand what you need, what the experiences are. Then when you go there, you have to actually have conversations with the people who you encounter to understand what they want, right? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to attract more diverse employees. You're trying to attract more diverse talent to your organization. And so if you use the same methods that you always used and you don't challenge yourselves and you don't challenge your leadership to get out of maybe what's comfortable and to put themselves in a position where maybe they are not the majority, right? Put themselves in a position where they are the outlier, where they are the only or one of a few, which you and I, Sondra, are used to that in our experiences, being in a room where we're the only one that looks like us, or we're only one of a few who looks like us. And shifting that so that people get real life experiences, and so that that experience and that type of feeling can touch them where they live, so that they can then begin to think about, well, what is it like to be in a room where I'm not the majority, and how do I operate in that room? How do I feel? Right? And
yeah,
asking people who know what it feels like to be there, what they would suggest and what they would recommend to make things better. It's about listening.
yeah. It is about listening and understanding people, right? You know, if I could have one wish for every person that I get to touch in my world, the people I work with, and even those closest to me, my family, it would be that they would explore the world and meet all of the world's people. Because I think when you have that perspective, and that's unfortunate about what happens here, I think sometimes in the United States is that we don't have access to a lot. Well, we're such a big country that a lot of times we're not leaving or we're not even visiting the other states, which it as somebody, I mean, in my career, I've had the fortunate uh, path of being able to travel to almost all 50 states. And not only because I was working in attractions, working side by side the people in those areas, I realized how diverse of a country we are. But sometimes we don't even recognize it because we're not. having those same experiences that I got to have. And that's why I say, my wish for the whole world and especially those that are in my circle and touched by me, I hope that they do get an experience to get to know other people. And what comes from that, I think that you kind of touched on a little bit is all the new information that you get when you have new people and new communities introduced to the experience that you're creating within your business,
Absolutely.
that's priceless.
That's right. I agree. I agree.
I think that it's really neat. And actually, I really enjoyed what you said about the tagline for the company being about inclusivity, because there's this is the future. This is where we're going. And
That's right.
thank you for being an advocate for that.
Absolutely.
Well, with regards, because we're bumping, are you okay on time?
I'm good.
Okay. I just have a couple more questions for you. With regards to the future of attractions and kind of some of what we see. I I have one. There's one attraction group in particular. They win a lot of awards. They're really well known. If at Hershen Entertainment, if you know Dolly World, and one of the things that I really love about I've interviewed several people. I got to visit a few of their parks this year. One of the things that I love about what they say in terms of a tagline for their business is to lead with love. And I know that there are so many people out there in business, that think it should be cutthroat and all of these things. But my feeling is that, and kind of talking to you, is that HR is kind of that heart of a business, right?
I agree.
The heart, the leading with love
Should
part
be.
comes. It should be.
Should be.
Yeah. It should be
Should
because
be.
it's about the people, right?
That's right.
The the problems of the business or the problems of the people become the problems of the business. And I love that there are companies out there, especially in this industry, that are making that known, that leading with love. I mean, there's no in my opinion, if that's the tagline, then there's no question that, diversity should exist within these organizations. And, so going back to the future of attractions, with your extensive background in HR and business development, what are some of the emerging trends that you see happening in HR, and what should attractions be paying attention to over the next few years with regards to where this side of the business is going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I have the perfect answer for that. One thing that I do think uh, that's going to be super important for businesses to be thinking of is this thought around neurodiversity and the fact that there are so many things happening, under the surface for a person or people who you might not be aware of. The iceberg analogy where you only see a couple things above the water, but then there's like a million things going on underneath.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens when we get into this conversation around neurodiversity. So I think that's something that businesses need to be paying attention to, because what we're seeing is just as though just in the same way that there's diversity of experience and there's diversity of perspective, there's also diversity in how people think and how people rationalize and how people process information and how that impacts the way that they show up in work. And so people who are on the spectrum
Yeah.
possess very high capability around things like developing, writing code, doing things that support machine learning, which by the way is AI. So what we have to do is look at how do we make sure that we're not overlooking the neurodiverse in the future of business, because this is certainly a sector that has been ignored and stands to help businesses do a great many things in the future.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up because I have talked a little bit about this on the show. So myself, I am dyslexic, every form of dyslexia that a person can possibly have, speech, sight, hearing, and so I do recognize that neurodivergent people can be highly intelligent. They can move a little bit differently in the business, sometimes even, dyslexics are known for like impeccable spatial awareness. It makes them great at strategy. That's why, it goes untalked about, but we think about 50% of CEOs and executives do tend to be neurodivergent, which is fascinating
Yes.
to me. But
Yes.
we don't, we might not be open to hiring those people if they aren't at that level in business. So I so appreciate you bringing that up because I 100% agree that there is a conversation that needs to be had around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm just thrilled that we have the space to talk about it and that we're making space today to talk about it as well, all of these things, and including
Yeah.
how HR becomes the heart of a business. And hopefully, those that are listening to what you had to say today, understand more about HR. And I think we've unraveled a little bit of the mystery today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, and I'm always happy to share what I know. It might just be a fraction of what other people know, but I'm very comfortable talking about where I've been and some of the work that I've been privileged to do.
Yeah, well, I really do appreciate you being so gracious with your time, not only
Absolutely,
for sharing your experience, but we do got to share what we do know. And
we
and
do.
I and I mean, you don't have to, but you did today, and I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness, especially around. I learned something new today. The transformational part of the business is can be that HR. I know my HR is listening because she's always listening to me on here. She's always listening to me on here. And but yeah, thank you so much for being on this show. And if any of our guests would like to get a hold of you, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah, my email address is real easy. It's my first and last name together at gmail.com. So yeah, feel free to reach out. I get a lot of emails, but I try to get to them all. My wife, I think she's on. She would tease me because my inbox is ridiculous, and I need to figure out how to like better sort it out and delete the things that I don't need. So I'm still learning that little task. But colincheadle at gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. And you are on LinkedIn where we're live today,
Yes,
right? I think I did tag
absolutely,
you there. So that might
absolutely.
be another way to get past the emails. My email box is the same way. So
Too many, too many.
yeah, I've got, luckily I'm fortunate enough to have some really brilliant people helping me keep that organized. But Colin, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your wisdom. I do hope to see you again. Uh, maybe on this show next time we need to talk about what's happening in the world of
That's
HR.
right.
I think that this is a conversation that needs to continue to happen. And I'm curious to see what is going to continue to happen in business and industries with regards to all of this. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks for
And
having me.
yeah, of course. We'll s- we'll see you soon.
All right, take care.
Take care. Well, I just want to wrap up the show today. Wasn't that amazing? Like I said, we haven't talked much about HR and leadership and how, the HR is the heart of a company and we can transform businesses if we look at what's happening in the company and the data. So there you guys go. There's your actionable step. Look at the data because that's the truth of a business, really. You can't manage what you can't measure. And I just want to thank Colin again for coming on the show today. I want to thank you all for listening. If you are listening on replay, please hashtag replay so that we know you were here watching us live. But also, if you are listening to us on the podcast channels, I want to thank you for listening and I appreciate your listening and viewership of this show. It is you guys who make this all possible. And I hope to continue to bring you more and more experts that are talking about the things that we need to talk about in order to move attraction businesses forward. And really, any business is as far as operations and go or HR goes. These are things that are happening in all businesses. This crosses industries. These topics cross industries. If there's something that you'd like to talk about, we're always looking for guest experts to be on the show. But also, if you want to leave us some information in the chat. We'll be sure to check those chats as we go. But of course, I just want to leave you with this. That is, go out and be great. And we'll see you next time on Live with Sondra.